are you going to allay the fears of people who are falling victim to this catastrophising?
One is that where I see things that are designed deliberately to scratch a racist itch, that I'll call them out, and I'll call them out in strong terms. And I've been doing that, and I'm going to continue to do that. But the second thing is making sure that what we put forward as the alternative, we explain to people what we're doing and why we're doing it. And when I look back on the progress we made over the last 6 years, we didn't always do that. So in areas like water reform and that debate around co-governance, I think as a government, we let that one get away on us. And actually, what we were doing there was justifiable, it was explainable, and we didn't make the public case strong enough, and we should have.
So is that because you were sort of a little bit worried, you wanted to stick in the middle, not sort of stick your necks out too much and scare the horses?
No, I actually think one of the problems was that we left the minister responsible, Nanaia Mahuta, on her own to explain that. And actually, we needed to have Pākehā voices in there as well, and that meant Pākehā ministers getting out there and explaining what we were doing and why we were doing it, not just leaving it to a Māori minister to explain.
We seem to have a government at the moment who have never encountered a redneck they don't want to scratch.
Koro nei hana, what are your reflections and your big takeaways from that?
My reflections are that Māori are very unified across the country, and with good reason. You know, the current government are doing a lot of things that are detrimental to Māori, that are taking us backwards as a country, and I think the message that we saw in Koro nei hana, for those who were listening, was that, Māori are very unified against that.
Last week, the Prime Minister told Parliament he believed Māori ceded sovereignty to the Crown after questioning from Green co-leader Chloe Swarbrick.
Does the Prime Minister believe that Māori ceded sovereignty?
I just say to the member, we have a Treaty of Waitangi as the founding document of New Zealand. In there is protection for both Crown and Māori interests. The position is very clear. The Crown, Māori ceded sovereignty to the Crown.
Did Māori cede sovereignty?
Well, no, actually. That's pretty clear. If you follow the various court rulings over time, if you follow all of the academic research, if you actually follow the treaty settlement process, the answer to that question is no. That doesn't mean that the Crown doesn't have sovereignty now, but Māori didn't cede sovereignty in signing the treaty. That's pretty clear. So now, the last 4 or 5 decades have been about how do we move forward in light of that. And that's where principles of the treaty are very important. It's where the progress we've made with treaty settlements is very important. And I think a government just literally suggesting that we could put a red pen through all of that and start again just fails to acknowledge the nearly 200 years worth of history that we're working with.
So the rubber hits the road when it gets up to the how-to.
That's right.
The power sharing. What's your vision? How do you see it panning out?
If you look at Te Aka Whaiora, that was a classic example of power sharing.
That was a devolutionary strategy. It's not quite te tiriti as is reflected up there.
But if you look at, say, the work we did with the wānanga, the 3 wānanga, for example, around devolving more authority to the wānanga to operate in a by Māori for Māori approach. Kura kaupapa kohanga reo, good educational examples of where a devolved approach can work quite well. And obviously, they're not perfect models. There's a lot of conversation about how we can even, improve on those outcomes. But they're working well. Kids who are in kura kaupapa Māori are actually doing better than Māori kids who are in mainstream schools. We should learn from that. What can we take from that? I think there's so much out there that's working. Let's not always talk it down.
David Seymour is celebrating the number of applications for charter school funding. What does that tell you? He's on the right track?
Well, I think the government need to be clear about what the problem is they're trying to solve here. Are they trying to say they want schools to have more flexibility, to do more innovative things? If so, why are they taking that away from the majority of public schools? Even if they introduce, say, 100 new charter schools, there's still going to be the minority of students who go to them. And why aren't we saying we want every school to be an exceptional school? That's where our focus should be. And, introducing a new range of schools and saying we're going to have schools competing with each other for the limited resources we've got available, all of the international evidence will tell you that's not going to work because it hasn't worked anywhere else that it's been tried.
And what about crime? Law and order was a big deal in the lead up to the election. Gang patches, ram raids.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the arguments on crime, I actually do think the majority of New Zealanders want to see us tackle the causes of crime rather than just lock people up afterwards. When I talk to New Zealanders about young people who are involved in ram raiding or retail crime, including the victims of that offending, and I talk to them about what they want to see that offending stop, but they also want to know that those kids are going to have a better future. They don't want to see those kids rotting in prison for the rest of their lives. They actually want to know that we're giving them something else to look forward to. And I think that's the conversation we need to have. Locking more people up will simply mean that we need more space to lock even more people up. If we deal with the causes of the criminal offending, as Minister of Police, as Minister of Education, and then as Prime Minister, we had a really concerted program of work to deal with those repeat ram raiding kids. When we put intensive support, not just around those kids, but around their whānau as well, we saw 75% of those kids stop reoffending. Let's get serious about this. Throwing them in jail isn't going to stop the offending. It might pause it for a wee while they're out of circulation, but it's not going to stop it. Stop the dysfunction, deal with the dysfunction, give the kids a better future. That's going to stop it permanently.
Labor has been critical of the government's increasing use of sanctions against those beneficiaries the government say fail to meet the obligation to be work ready. But how credible is Labor on this issue?
We, as a government, still had sanctions within the welfare system. We haven't said there's no place for sanctions, but right now, when there are more and more people signing up for benefits because there simply aren't the jobs available, that's not the time to be beating people with a big stick. We've got a very clear position as a party. If we want to get people who have been on benefits for a long time off benefits and into work, it's a stick approach is not going to do it. You're going to need to provide them with more support. It's going to be things like, training. It's going to be things like apprenticeships. It's going to be mentoring. Those are the things that are going to get them into sustainable employment outcomes. We know from the research that when you impose sanctions and you push people into work through that, it'll tend to be short-term employment, it won't be sustained, and they will be back on benefits again.
How would you describe politics, the state of politics now in Aotearoa?
I think we're in politics in flux at the moment. I think there's a lot that needs to change about New Zealand. I think our economy really needs to change, and the way we think about our economy needs to change. I think we've had an economic model for the last 40 to 50 years now that has resulted in an explosion in inequality, and it's resulted in people who work really hard to generate the wealth of the country not necessarily enjoying their fair share of that wealth. And so, I think all of that's coming to a head now. We've seen 14 years now of short-termism from government, where we haven't invested in the future. We haven't made sure that we're maintaining and building schools and hospitals and the infrastructure we need as a country, and all of that's coming to a head.
Just reflecting back on the campaign, will you be proposing to make those changes around capital gains tax and stuff like that?
Oh, we'll certainly be campaigning on a very different tax policy at the next election to the one we had at the last election. I've already made that really clear. I do think that is one of the things where we've got to front up to the inequalities in our tax system at the moment. Salary and wage earners are disproportionately shouldering the tax payments.
There's anger out there, there's determination, there's a sense of kotahitanga. What about Labour, Te Pāti Māori and Greens? Where is there some sense of collective opposition?
Yeah, we've actually got a pretty good working relationship across the Parliament at the moment. The three parties who are not part of the government. We do work quite well in Parliament at the moment. I've said closer to the election, we'll set out, what we think a future government might look like. And I think it's too soon to do that now. But in terms of the work we're doing in opposition, I think we're working pretty well together.
So there'll be a whole bunch of young people out there that'll be looking, that's if we can get them to vote, looking at the different parties and thinking, okay, who's going to be the boldest? Who's going to be the bravest?
I think a lot of young New Zealanders also want to know that the plans that we're putting forward are credible and we're actually going to deliver on the things that we say we're going to do. So my goal for the next election is that we are going to have a bold plan for New Zealand's future, but it's going to be credible and it's going to be deliverable.
So when is this going to kick in?
We'll start talking about new policy ideas next year.
That seems a long way off for a lot of people.
Yeah, but the election's still 2 years away. But in terms of the new ideas, the things that it might be different, how might the next Labor government look different from the last Labor government, you'll certainly start to see more of a flavour of that next year.
What's caught so many off balance, community commentators, politicians, is the scale and pace of change, the wholesale rejection of policies from previous governments.
Do you think it's just the nature of politics that when a new party comes into power or a new government, they just get rid of everything that the last lot did?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's a feature of this government. But actually, if you look at the Key government taking over from the Clark government, the Ardern taking over from the Key government, we didn't see that. We actually saw a lot of the things that were happening continue. Yes, there was a shift in emphasis sometimes about how we moved forward, but we didn't just come into government in 2017 and just jettison everything the previous government had been doing. We actually sought to build on it where there was a good foundation to build from.
So are you not going to introduce any alternative policy this year?
I acknowledge that there was criticism of the last government for some of the promises we made in the election, particularly at 2017, not turning into reality. We're not going to repeat that again.
Are you going to be leading the party next time, or are you the caretaker?
No, I'm absolutely in this to win the next election. I had 9 months as Prime Minister. I learned a lot during that time. That means that I'll be ready to hit the ground running after the next election.